Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the historical fiction genre discussion panel live on OWS CyCon 2019. Make sure you hashtag that. That's hashtag OWS CYCON 2019. We are hitting 5 million impressions as of today. So we want to hit 10 million by the end of the night. All right, I'm going to turn things over. Our lovely Stephen Pearl is going to host our panel. He's in charge. I don't know what I was thinking, but he's he is great with the subject. He has more knowledge in the historical fiction than I do, as I am just coming into the historical fiction genre. So I'm going to turn things over to Stephen, and we'll let everybody introduce themselves and what they do and what they write.
Okay, well, ladies first. Virginia, what do you do? What are you writing?
Well, I have the writer name Virginia Carraway Stark. If you Google me, that's how I come up. Um, I write a lot. I've written from chicken soup to the soul to all sorts of fantasy to historical fiction. I've done guest blogs and essays and won a few awards here and there and been nominated for some others. But as far as historical fiction goes, uh, the most recent one that I did was a project with a bunch of other people on great men and great women. There were two separate ones, and that was my latest historical fiction.
Okie doke. And I, I'm sorry
It's
for
Ed.
that.
It's Ed Ireland.
Ed.
Ed. Okay.
Okay. Generally, I do epic fantasy work. I did do a piece called Crime Scene, which is basically a look at the Kennedy assassination. And I've seen and read all kinds of accounts of it, but never one from the proposed mafia side of the deal. So I wrote my book using that direction. Um, Being from Philly, I made it a Philly hitman that was involved, and it was a hell of a lot of fun. It was a hell of a lot of work because when you're doing fantasy, there's not really much to research. When you're doing a historical fiction piece, everything needs to be on the up and up. It needs to be accurate. So I spent God knows how many hours researching Old Philly, as well as various ways of killing people. So if the FBI ever comes in, I'm toast. I'm going away for a long
We're all
time.
toast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You look at any of our internet browser histories. It's scary stuff. Okay, Richard?
Yes, my name is Richard White. I am an author in multiple genres. However, today I am playing the role of Beauregard Rivers, or Shotgun Bo Rivers for short. Um, I write Western historical fiction. My current title is Letters from the Grave. You can see that over at beauregardrivers.ga and also on Amazon and all the fun places. It is a Western historical fiction based in the Old West, and it is letters from the Old West outlaws writing a letter to their killers. One last letter. If they were still here today, what would they say?
I'm Stephen B. Pearl. The B makes it easy to find me on the internet. And I don't so much write historical fiction. I like to call what I do anthropological fiction, in so much as with Horn of the Kraken, you can see the poster behind me to there. It's a Norse fantasy Viking adventure. And if I describe a longhouse, that's what a longhouse was like. If I describe going through a storm in a corvée, a small longship, that's what it was like to go through a storm in a corvée. But I pay very fast and loose with the history, although I do use the historical conflict between Jarl Eric Bloodaxe and his bastard half-brother Hakon over the throne of Athelstane as a backdrop to the action. I do much the same in my other historical fiction piece, The Hollow Curse, which does a segment in the 1500s, the 1700s, and the Old West. So, how challenging do you folks find it to get information to be reasonably accurate in what your portrayals?
Actually, finding all the information was fine. The trouble comes in is the wealth of information. There's just so much, so you have to pick and choose what you're going to use.
Yeah, Virginia?
Yeah, I would say the very similar. I took a course in writing historical fiction after I wrote historical fiction. And they really got into the difference of primary sources versus secondary and tertiary sources. And that really struck home to me because I had done most of my things through secondary sources. And some of the writers that I had written with had gone so secondary as to write from other people's novels and things like that, which was thin ice, like pretty much plagiarism there. And it had to be like weeded out because going for the primary source is so important when you're doing historical fantasy or historical anything, I think. And that was my big takeaway.
Richard?
Myself, it's a little bit of both. I mean, sometimes I can find quite a bit of information. The issue with it is because I write most of my historical fiction is based in the Old West, and a lot of it you get from the stories that came from the Old West, which in turn turned into the dime novel series. And so a lot of it is kind of fabricated. They say for Billy the Kid, he only killed like maybe a half dozen people, but the information out there suggests that it was way more than that. So it's hard to decide what to use. Obviously he did some things as an outlaw, but what do you use? Do you want it based more on the factual statistics, or do you want to use the fabricated story, which is part of the fictional aspect of historical fiction? So, but other than that, it's pretty easy to find that stuff. My new historical fiction work in progress is an espionage historical fiction. That one it's tough. I've been researching it for 12 years. It has a lot of there's a lot of information out there. It's deciphering what information could be possibly true and what information you should or should not use.
I was very lucky in my research in so much as I was contracted to write Horn of the Kraken by the Fate of the Norns Ragnarok role-playing system. And it was a very, again, anthropologically accurate role-playing system where the creator had done over 20 years research into the Norse and created this gaming system. Consequently, most of my legwork was done. I just had to read the manuals. Add to that, I was in the SCA for 9 years. So I have the fundamentals of sword and shield warfare. I'm actually rusty as heck, but I'm fairly good with a longsword. But I've had that life experience, and that's where a lot of my stuff comes in, which I'm not giving dates, things that happened. I'm not giving actual historical conflicts. In fact, the book alters from our timeline 3 years before when Ragnarok begins. So it's dominoed out a bit. But I was able to access all that and then just crack some books and get the other thing. The one that was difficult for me was my the Old West segment, because I never studied much of that, and I had to get a few Zane Grey novels and a couple of factual books and cobble it together out of that. So, how much is the greats? I think it was Virginia mentioned that people were going for secondary and trinary sources. How much does that factor into your inspiration level, like things like Zane Grey, if you're writing in the Old West?
I did an Old West screenplay, and I was watching Deadwood at the time. And I didn't have any plot points come in from Deadwood or anything like that. It was actually like a ghost story sort of screenplay. But I think the feel of it definitely came through. And when I was imagining the sort of town and the sort of people in it, I definitely had that sort of idea in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it influenced me very profoundly, but not at all on the page. Like, I don't think if you went through the page, you could say, oh, she was watching Deadwood here. But I knew, and if I was to write casting notes, people would know.
Yeah, the spirit of it comes through, sort of.
Yeah, a bit of that energy that they used for that definitely was involved. I'll confess to that.
How about distilling out your characters? Anybody, giving them the sense of the person of that time.
I would like to just reflect quickly on Deadwood. I believe the screenwriters of that thing had the worst foul mouth that I've ever seen in my life. I do not believe there is a single sentence in the entire show and throughout the entire series that every other word is the F-bomb.
What the bleep do you bleep and mean, bleep?
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't put that in my screenplay.
I actually, one of the things I love to play with is period profanity.
Mm.
Yeah, I have one in Horn of the Kraken. It's Freya's tits. And
ice cold they are, I hear.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that, because of my fantasy novels. In the one series, The Journals of the Huntress, one of her favorite saying is "Sweet Suri's breasts," which is Suri's is the name of the goddess that they worship, and that's like, Sweet Suri's breasts. What are you people doing? Like, it's just odd that you mentioned that, and that's what I have in there.
Yeah, people are pretty much the same, but how they express faith and so forth has changed over the centuries. So I just figure there's a lot of room for inventive profanity.
Yeah,
that fits with the time.
And even there's an actual quote. I wish I knew which Edda it was from, but there is a quote, and it says, "It seems to me that Freya," and then it goes on to, though beautiful and all these other things, is a bitch. And it actually says that in the Edda. So, I mean, people really haven't changed.
No, well, they're queens. If you're a queen, well, Game of Thrones, you can't be all gentility and light, or else you're not going to keep your position. Look at Queen Elizabeth.
Hmm.
Great lady, very intelligent, but my God, she could be hell on wheels.
One of the stories I had to write was about Queen Isabella of Spain, and trying to figure out how to write her in anything approaching a compassionate light. Like, it was um that was hard. I actually looked through a lot of history, and I found out that the reason she was so much on the rampage and that she started the Inquisition and everything else was because her brother was gay, and she felt she needed to do all of this destruction for his soul. And so that was kind of what I used, is her misguided idea of being caught up so much in her religion and things that it made her do the Spanish Inquisition. I mean, how do you find a nice thing to say about someone who started the Spanish Inquisition? But that was about what I came up with.
She had nice fingernails. So
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with Gerald Eric Bloodaxe, who I use as a secondary character in Horn of the Kraken and its upcoming sequel, The Mistletoe Spear. And what I ended up doing with him is I read the history of the man, and then I kind of combined him with an old friend of mine who's passed now, who was a soldier in the English African campaign. And my old friend saw more of brutality than anyone ever should. He talked to me a couple of times over it about it when we were both had a few too many beers. But by doing that, the human element became Pat, and Eric filled in the blanks. And I think it kind of worked. Do you ever do something like that? Draw somebody you know and blend them into the mix?
absolutely, absolutely. My guy in crime scene, his name is Sal DeSantis. He is about 80% my Uncle Frank, um, and then a couple other people thrown in. I think pretty much that whenever you create a character, you're going to draw on some people that you know, some quality of people that you know, and put them in that character. I have an ex-wife, so all of my evil characters are based on her. So it's yeah, you always draw on people you know, always.
I
You're
think
likely
that
to get a
happens.
phone call.
I think that happens even when you're not aware of it. I have a character named Sasha, and she's a character that appears again and again in my science fiction. And people would read it. It's from the first person. So a lot of my writing is, but everyone was like, "You're Sasha, aren't you? Sasha's you. This is totally about you." So many people, like, she was nothing like me in my opinion, and I objected to it rather strongly because she was so much nicer than me. And I was just like, "No, it's not me." And finally, it was kind of like a Spock writing "I am not Spock" and then "I am Spock" as Leonard Nimoy went through his career. Eventually, I ended up just putting my own face on the covers for Sasha and being like, "Fine, everyone wants to say this. I accept this. I put myself into this too much, and here I am." So,
Well, if I
yeah.
may say so, you have a face that can pull it off.
Which part?
No, it's just you're attractive.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
I did actually something similar and on purpose in one of my paranormal fictions, where I have this character Ray McAndrews, who's a greatly perfected version of myself. He's smarter, wiser, better shape, better looking, the whole 9 yards. But at the core, I can find those elements. Really,
Hmm.
Well, actually, I didn't do it intentionally when I was writing. I just sort of discovered it when I finished.
I still don't think I'm much like Sasha. Like, she's much more meek than I am. Much. She's the brunette. She's got dark eyes. She's like just a total sweetheart. She doesn't say the things I would always say, and it just amazed me that people were like, "That's your Sasha." It's like, okay, fine.
Okay, Richard, how about you? Do you appear in your own books in
Oh,
altered form?
absolutely, and I shouldn't. Yes, I find that I write a lot of it, and that comes from the fact that my first four books, um, my two poetry books, the new poetry book, my first one, Rodeo Days, as well as What Happened to Me, is me. I am the main character. The poetry is written from my childhood on up through when I started writing, and the Rodeo Days is my stories as well as some of my fellow friends that traveled the rodeo circuit. It's our stories, our real life experiences um, in the rodeo circuit, and then What Happened to Me is my mini memoir. So I am the character in those books. So it's very easy for me to end up when I'm writing my characters into a story that there's a lot of different features and a lot of different things that I end up becoming part of that character. When I wrote Letters from the Grave, there's a lot of first person in there because of the fact of how the letters are written. Because it's Billy the Kid writing to Pat Garrett, or it's Jesse James writing to Robert Ford, or it's Butch Cassidy writing to the Pinkertons. So I become Butch Cassidy, and I become Billy the Kid writing that letter. And when I do that, there's a lot of traits that are of mine and passions of the Old West that I end up bringing into the writing itself. When it comes to my espionage book, Gemini Project, the main character is a special ops operative working for the CIA. I wasn't, that far up in the food chain when I was in the military. I was a cavalry scout, but at the same time, a lot of different features and a lot of different things and during character building and designing that character comes from my own personal experiences in the military and being overseas. So that's where a lot of that character's backstory and design is coming from because I experienced it. So I know what a soldier does and how they handle themselves and what they wear and what they do and how they take care of themselves and how they take care of their uniforms and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to. I definitely can see Ian Fisher being me or me being Ian Fisher in Gemini Project.
The cry of the wild child.
My daughter is so intent on not being on camera that she ended up spilling a whole can of soda on the floor.
Oh.
Yeah. So it's like, jump into emergency mode before the ants come.
Yep. Well, we're talking about how much of ourselves we put in our characters.
I try not to put anything of myself in, but that obviously doesn't work. In my fantasy novel, Vespius is a consummate smartass, which is something that I pride myself on. So I put that into her. and I end up putting actually a lot more of myself than I plan or want to. I put a lot of my values in my characters. Um, as Rich was saying, you know, things that you do yourself, you can write much more easily because you know how it is. Like I can equate with the military thing. I was in the military, so I know how these people act. As opposed to, I was never in the military, but I'm going to research it. And I've read, you know, War and Peace, and I've read The Longest Day, and you know, I've read all this stuff, so I know how they act. But really, you don't. It's, you know, it's like I tell like a lot of young people, you know, I'll hear, oh, you know, if I was in the military, I would do this and this and this, and yeah, and I try and tell them, you know, until you've been shot at, you don't know. You really don't. You know, I thought I was going to be, you know, the next congressional medal winner, but no. Once you're shot at, no. Uh-uh.
Mhm.
I was in a ditch trying to pull my dog on top of me. The dog was trying to pull me on top of him. No, it's a much different thing when it actually happens.
Closest I've ever come was a bunch of jackasses chasing me around a parking lot in a car and trying to run me over.
Oh,
But I think there's a slight echo in human experience, in so much as it's life-threatening. But yeah, I was going to say something intelligent.
How? Let me.
now is not the time for that.
Oh, ow. um,
Yeah.
Let me ask a question. This was our blog hop category or topic, and I just want to see what else besides our blogs that we publish. What else everyone has to say on the topic? Um, what? How do you, each one of you, bring the past to life?
I was kind of lucky in the fact that I was actually alive during my time period that I wrote about. So I remember a lot of things. I had to, you know, when I was writing the book, I was thinking, okay, there was a big bookstore. What was the name of that store? And I could, you know, and I would have to research what was the name of the store. Um, who who were the headliners at the clubs in that time? And then part of the story takes place in Miami. So I had to research what big hotels were in Miami at that time, what entertainers were in those hotels. You know, so and then I had to do the same with New Orleans, the same with Dallas. So I had to research different cities that I wasn't aware of. But the Philly part was kind of pretty easy, pretty easy. You know, when you've been there, in your case, that would be tough. That would be tough.
One of the things I do that's I found really useful, like I said, I was in the SCA for nine years, and I have also gone to black powder events. These recreationist groups are magnificent for getting yourself in the headspace, getting the details that make your come to life, such as how to play Fox and Hound, which was a board game that predated chess and was extremely popular throughout the Middle Ages.
I've actually played that.
Oh, cool.
But when I was like little, I had a weird childhood.
Yeah, there's a lot of these things that, well, hide and go seek throughout the Middle Ages wasn't a children's game. You know why those mazes were so popular, the hedge mazes? They were grounds for playing hide and go seek. And it was actually used as a swingers game. because they'd hide, the women would hide, and the men would go. It was kind of, there was a Norse version called the Game of Shadows, where you'd go into the woods at night and you do the same thing. Children and adult versions. Kind of weird stuff in the Middle Ages.
I find for my characters that reading very intimate details about the lifetime of the people, if that's possible, or just about the time itself, like games and stuff, is a good way to get close to it. Finding that in with the characters where I feel things are copacetic between them and myself, that's when I just kind of slide into their world. And I don't feel at that point that anything else is needed. I'm just there. Like, I wrote a story about Leonardo da Vinci, and there are these stories about how he was in a cave when he was a kid. And whether or not it was true, he was convinced there was a dragon in the cave. And he fought the dragon and escaped. And there was, I think it was a hawk that came and landed on him when he was a baby. And these were stories that were told to him that made him feel like he was set apart. And besides being a bastard, he had all of these little things happen to him that made him feel different from the rest of society. And there came a point where these factors just made him so relatable, where it's just like, yeah, I'm there. I'm to the isolation. I'm away from all of these pictures and things that we think about, and I'm with this little boy who's scared of the dragon. I'm with this little boy who holds on to these things that make you special in your own mind. And you go from there to wanting to fly, and it becomes seamless in my mind. Like, of course you want to build a flying machine. A bird landed on you when you were a kid, well, a baby. And to be illegitimate and to have a mother and a stepfather who took care of you to the degree that he was taken care of was pretty special for the time. But to be put into a place where you're an apprentice and you have to do things, you're always serving, and to have to make weapons that you don't want to make, that are going to hurt people, but you have to because you're ruled by a master. Those are all things that I don't know why, maybe I'm weird, but it seemed really relatable to me. And it just, I didn't feel like it was history at that point. It just felt like I was there, I guess. So
Yeah, no, that's absolutely not weird. That's building a character. That's creating a person. I try to do that with all my characters. I tell people the measure of a book is in the depth of the character. You have to create somebody that's real.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, what point is there in reading the book? Why, if you don't care about the character, why read the story? So you have to create a character. In my books, I created this tragic little girl who, life was hers, and then all of a sudden, one incident happened, and it got in her mind so bad that by the time the second book comes around, she's a roaring drunk. It happens. Tragedy happens. Different people take it different ways, but the fact is that I made her real. She's as real as you are to me.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do that.
I find that's how people become real to me. I mean, I don't know how much someone would look at this and be like, wow, what a psychopath. But for me, my older brother and I never really got on at all. He was hyper religious, and I'm not, and etc. And anyway, he died very suddenly, and I didn't say goodbye to him. I felt he should be with his family, and I had a 3-day novel marathon coming up. So I decided to write it from my brother's perspective. And I wrote his life and his death from his perspective. And I wrote it as truthfully as I possibly could, you know, coming from another perspective. And I gave it to my husband to read. And he got about halfway through it and he said, "I can't read this." And I was like, "Well, why not?" And he said, "Because I hate your brother and you're making him sympathetic. And he's doing horrible things to you in this, but it's from his perspective. And I can't, you're making his reasons for it rational, but he's hurting you in the book." And I said, "But it made me feel better. Like to me, it made so much be forgiven because I understood those reasons and he became real to me in a way that he never was in life, which is kind of sad, but it's easier to forgive the dead than the living,
Absolutely.
unfortunately."
No,
Unless you're Italian.
Do it to you again.
Yeah, it's easier unless you're Italian. Then you carry grudges to the grave.
Shit, I'm coming back from the dead. There are some people that are going to be haunted for the rest of their entire living life.
I'm a reincarnationist. I just don't want to meet them again.
Right, exactly. I want to rewind back to one of your comments, Ed, and you had said something about researching Dallas, the time in the life that I grew up in, because I'm an 80s baby. The only Dallas research that I thought I could go off of was J.R. Ewing.
I was born in 61. And one thing that I find with stuff that I write, doing the universal, there's something that made everybody in the nation or the world hold their breath thing, is completely lost on people who aren't old enough to remember the lunar landing. Because that was such a pivotal event for those of us alive when it happened. And I've tried to do that in my writing a couple of times, that everybody's holding their breath. And there's just this generational disconnect as to who gets it and who doesn't.
Well, yeah, it's at the same time, when I was a kid, we were doing the duck and cover drills, which is something you guys don't know about. You've heard of it, but you don't know really what it felt like. I was born in 54. I was 62, 61, 62. I was in first and second grade. And, we had to, the alarm would go off and we had to huddle against the wall. And we were constantly being fed that, this could happen. This could happen at any minute. It might not be a drill. So every time that alarm went off, we were scared.
It's actually, I want to just
a little
reiterate.
younger than you, but I remember distinctly my father calling the whole family together and having a very serious discussion of where we would meet
if
the bomb dropped. Anyone who survived would go to blank.
I just want to reiterate on that. A lot of the people in like my generation, the newer generations, don't remember that having to do that. But now with the whole coin of phrase "history repeats itself," I know our schools up here are doing it, and I know a lot of other schools are now across the nation, and they're doing drills that are similar to the duck
Yeah,
and cover. The
active
yep,
shooter drills.
the active shooter drills. My daughter's come home a couple of times talking about having to do these active shooter drills, and her and I have had that conversation. You know what I want you to try and do if it happens. And
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
really tough for me because I'm a first responder. If anything like that happens in my area, I'm one
Yeah.
of the first fire departments and EMTs that's going to be responding. And it's not just for my child, because half of my fire department have children in the same school.
Hmm.
So we're going to be nuts if anything like that ever
Yeah.
happens in this
And
area.
and I have to say it's such a shame that that's going on today. I mean, what I went through with the bomb, that was a faceless person pushing a button somewhere that I don't even know where they are. That was a casualty of war. Whereas these active shooter drills are just, I don't know. I don't know.
One
I
sick
mean,
bastard.
yeah, I mean, if the bomb was dropped, you never saw the face of your killer.
I
Uh,
think. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. These drills are much different. I would actually hate being a kid in these times.
I think they're two very different sorts of fears. I think that the faceless fear, in a way, is worse because if there's a shooter, you can do something. You can tackle them. You can do these things. You can look around you. You can say that person looks like someone who might do something. You can be alert. But if someone pushes a button somewhere, there's nothing you can do, and that's a sort of helpless terror that, despite the fact that it isn't personal and immediate, is still just traumatizing. You
How,
know,
Well, again,
how do
going back to
how
what
do
I
you
said before, unless you've been shot at, you don't know how you're going to react. Yeah, some people will tackle. Most
mhm.
people are just going to be rooted in fear,
Oh
and
yeah.
how do
that's
you,
why they have to have drills because the majority of the people are going to stand there and they're going to be shot.
mhm. How do you spin that into your fiction?
Oh.
Ooh. It's hard to fear is a very hard emotion to write. It's because everybody feels it differently.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I mean, when I have to put it in, I put it in the way I feel it. And that's all you can do. There's no set rule for what fear is.
I like to write various characters responding in different ways. Cat juggling.
I haven't had to get to that point yet where um I've had to write in someone's feelings of fear. Um I mean, at least, and but I'm sure, regardless, of who they were, what they were, outlaws of the old west that I've written about in the past. I'm certain that one way or another they've felt fear along their tirades, um, and and everything. I just didn't know how to write it, and I didn't really go that far. When I write um, this the new book, Gemini Project, I know that I'm going to have to face writing that, and that is, like you said, Ed, going to be a hard write because I'm going to end up writing it how I feel fear, how I experience
Mm-hmm.
fear, how I have experienced it in the past, present, and possibly the future. And it's not going to be the same as Stephen or Virginia or even you or or any of my readers. My readers may read it and go, oh, "It's not too bad,"
Yeah.
or
Now, It's a tough write because when you're drawing on what you know about fear, it's stuff that makes you afraid. So you have to admit, first of all, like, okay, this scares the hell out of me,
Right.
and then you have to try to describe that feeling. Uh, for me, if 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 I'm afraid of something, it's almost like I'm being tortured with it. So what I did was in my book, I took that a step further, and I gave my character that tortured feeling, but then I added um, that it manifested even worse when storms came in, and she could hear the voices in the thunder mocking her and you know torturing her with her fear. So yeah, it's just it's what's inside of you that more than any other emotion. That's the hardest one to write.
I do in my writing process. It's very much like acting, where you find a parallel in yourself to what the character is experiencing,
I
and
agree with that.
yeah, and I have a phobia. I'm not going to reveal it. That's too personal. But I have no problem with snakes, no problem with spiders, no problem with any particular type of animal you can name. I even like sharks. Um, but I've had to write characters that had those phobias, and I just changed the trigger as to what that phobic fear was and tried to put that on the page. And I think there are several different types of fear. The fear of danger to yourself is quite distinct from the fear of the loss of a loved one.
Yeah.
So I think you tap into which stream of fear is appropriate. Okay, how about the lighter side? How about making a hero? How do you take a character from the past and make them heroic?
What, like Queen Isabella of Spain?
Yes, excellent. Yeah,
That one was really, really hard. Like I had to find a place where I had some empathy for her. And that was finding out that she had this brother she was ashamed of, and realizing how deeply the religion affected her. That that was something that I could kind of tune into, is to be like, this is her only way of dealing with this. So let's make this into something that is as heroic as it can be. Because to me, the Spanish Inquisition is just like one of those things humans did that is like, oh, wow, can't believe I'm one of this race. But when I undertook it, I didn't really realize how incredibly responsible she was for it. So I was like, I don't know if I can do this. And then digging deep into her background and finding this out about her brother and realizing this was a trigger for her. Yeah, I think finding people's triggers, that's where you find out where people are heroes, because they're doing things for a reason. And even if those things are bad, to them it feels like they're doing it for a good reason. And if you can understand what those reasons are, then they can be heroes, even if it's kind of an anti-hero.
I had a similar thing with Eric Bloodaxe because he was the son of Harold Fairhair, the great Jarl who consolidated an empire that was larger than any empire that preceded it, including the Roman Empire. He was also the Kennedy of his time. And basically, if it was in a skirt, he'd try to lift it. And I have this scene where Jarl Eric is saying that Harold Fairhair, basically, he watched his mother die a little with each bastard born. And you realize that he was both trying to live up to his father and never acknowledging his own virtues, in so much as far as we know, Eric Bloodaxe was faithful to his wife and had a different virtue set than his father. You kind of felt some compassion for the man because, yeah, he was trying to live up to this impossible level and never acknowledging his own positivity. Uh, how about Ed, Richard? Do you have anything similar in your?
And in crime scene, Sal is a hitman. So how do you make a hero out of somebody who kills for a living? You can't. But what you can do is, when my grandfather came over, he worked for Al Capone, and he ran whiskey from Canada down into Chicago. When he moved to Philly, he was much more low key. He had his little card games and stuff like that. So there were a lot of these types around. In South Philly, it's they're like a hierarchy in South Philly. Um, you as a tradesman, I did work for a couple of these guys. I got to know them, and you find out that what they do is bad, but they are people. Um, you know, so what I went about trying to do in my book was make Sal human. He's not going to be a hero, but he can be human. Um, he was the old school mafia guy. He has no problem walking in and killing somebody, and then giving a donation to the widow. You know, or in my particular book, he has a contract for somebody, and when he goes into the home, the guy was molesting a child, which infuriated him. You know, and he wound up taking care of this kid for the rest of her life. So, you had these really horrific qualities. At one point, I said Sal could kill a room full of people and make it look like they all died of natural causes. But then on the other hand, you have these human qualities. So it kind of balances out. He's not going to be a hero, but he's not going to be a villain. That's the best I could do with him.
I think that's why we all focus a bit on taking villains to heroes, is because I think we all, generally view ourselves as heroes. So bringing the characters that are villains more to where we see things in life, I think that's part of our character building.
A bit, yeah, a bit. Yeah. But now in my fantasy novels, my villains are evil. They are pure ex-wife evil.
Well, so, for me,
I have a scene in the Mistletoe Spear where Sugolina, one of my female leads, has just pummeled a crusader to death to open a pathway for a group of her cohorts to escape. And she just pauses for a moment and wonders, I wonder if you had a daughter. Because her parents were massacred by crusaders. And I try to throw in humanizing moments.
Exactly.
Richard, you've written about Billy the Kid.
Yes.
You got to have something to weigh in on this one.
Well, it's the thing when it comes to that. It's easy and a hard write at the same time, because of the simple fact that the media and certain people believed Billy, as well as others. I mean, Billy and the whole regulators, as well as Jesse James. I've written about Wild Bill Hickok and even Wyatt Earp. Many saw them as villains, but in retrospect, in many senses, they were a hero. Um, Wyatt Earp plays a double role in that, all the way from Dodge City right straight into the famous stories we read about Tombstone, and even into his life after Tombstone. I mean, he was in the before Dodge City, he was a horse thief. He literally threw his life away to booze and whatever because of him losing his first wife. And his father, being a judge, was able to get him out of jail and not face the consequences because he had stolen a horse and he had killed a man and stolen some money. He was going to hang. Wyatt Earp was going to hang, and he got him out of that mess and said, "Ride, get out of here and go and never come back." And went from that into a lawman in Dodge City and cleaned up, the crime and all of that, and then into Tombstone. And when he went to Tombstone originally, the one of the key notes that the movie Tombstone got correct was that Wyatt originally didn't want to be a lawman anymore. He wanted to be a businessman. He wanted to get out of it. Unfortunately, because the fact, one, his reputation and his brother's reputation preceded itself everywhere they went. They had no choice but to step into that role because the crime was so bad with the cowboy faction going through there. And at that point in time, even the fight at the OK Corral, sure, he was the hero in a sense because they were trying to do good and stop the crime. But at the same time, he was a villain, and they did kill people, and a lot of them. And in a sense, the fact that they were able to get off on the charges and everything is the reason it sparked the next, cause and effect, which is why the cowboy faction came in and murdered Morgan and shot Virgil as well, trying to kill. I mean, they were trying to erase the Earps, which then ensued the Vendetta Ride. The Vendetta Ride, sure, was a remarkable story in Wyatt Earp's time, and many felt it was heroes. But what they did in that Vendetta Ride was complete villain. They were no longer living by the badge. They were living by revenge, retribution, and and one of my favorite lines in the movie, which is total Hollywood and total, probably fabricated, but not really in a sense because of Holliday's real character in real life, when he says he's not after revenge, he's after a reckoning. And really, that's what they were doing. They rode 3 states wide and killed every man wearing a red sash, whether they liked it or not. They didn't care, to revenge and reckon Morgan's murder. So,
well, I mean,
go ahead.
I was going to say, very often, hero or villain is a matter of perspective. I think of Charlemagne, who, by any modern standard, was a war criminal. 30,000 Saxons defeated, tied, and he told his men, just go slit their throats. He killed an entire male generation. The man was a monster. His battle cry, convert or die.
And look at how he treated his wives And his daughters, like not a
Oh,
single daughter could get married until he was dead.
I didn't know that aspect of him. The
He
rest
was
was
a
enough to
jerk.
turn me off him. But, you know, he's hailed by some as a great Christian champion. And personally, I'm on the other side of that fence. And no, monstrous villain.
Yeah, perspective is everything. If you look at Gregory Maguire's books, he's famous. He wrote Confessions of a Wicked Stepsister. He wrote Wicked, Wicked.
Mhm.
I mean, he took the villain from Frank Baum's works and just turned the perspective around. Okay, this is what you think I was doing, but this is what I was actually doing. And it's like, well, wait a damn minute. And for, the lion, the cowardly lion, he was cowardly because she found him as a baby and protected him his entire life. Never had to fight anything or anybody in his entire life. So when he was now out on his own, of course he's a coward. He's never had to do it.
Mm-hmm.
The Tin Man, he was being beaten to death. She cast a spell to protect him from the pain, which turned him into a Tin Man. Was she trying to do that? No, she was trying to help him. And it's the whole perspective thing. So when I write, I always try to look at the same situation from both points of view, the hero and the villain. And I try to offer that turn of perspective. So again, which gives the characters more depth because now you can see why they're doing what they're doing. And sometimes you get to realize that the heroes and villains aren't all that much different from each other. Like in the Wyatt Earp. Wyatt Earp is a perfect example. He's a hero and a villain. He's cleaning up Dodge, but he's being a hard ass. He's shooting people. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
he's just shooting people for wrong reasons.
And
You need that twist of perspective.
And he wouldn't think twice of pistol whipping somebody.
Exactly.
And it really, because of those actions and because of those things, yes, he took matters into his own hands in the ways that he saw fit. And because of that, it made him no different from the McClowrys, made him no different from Billy the Kid. It made him no different from any of the other outlaws. In a sense. So in saying that, you're absolutely right. Many of, especially in the Old West nostalgia, the villains and the heroes were they were the same type of people.
Yeah, and it all comes down to the perspective of the people that are listening to the story. Well, he was doing it because he wanted to clean up the town. He wanted to make it safe. Or he was doing it because he was the douchebag who had let the power go to his head. It's the perspective of the people hearing the story.
Yeah, and of course the winners write the history.
And how good your public
Always.
relations guys are. Like that's you see that more and more people going and saying, like, reevaluating Julius Caesar. Like, why do we think Julius Caesar is so cool? And we see these reevaluated histories more and more often, and I don't necessarily agree with them. I think that they still need to be acknowledged for doing great things, and vilifying them based off of modern morals isn't really necessarily right, but I think it is interesting.
The only thing I think Rome was really good at was public works and plumbing.
I was going to say falling.
Well, yeah,
they were awesome at that.
They kept doing it for a long time too. You look at some, of course, no offense, I'm a Canadian, but on the world stage, I think that Trump and Nero have a lot more in common than I'm comfortable with.
Oh, actually, Nero was pretty cool.
Well, he was a showman.
Well, he wasn't as bad as people thought. He really got into being um, a spoiled little rich boy, and there was a lot of talk that he was the one who burned down Rome, and that's the whole story of playing his fiddle while Rome burned and stuff. But the evidence that he burned Rome came about much later on, and it was actually something that the Christians brought up because he tried to blame the Christians, and the Christians were like, "No, we think he did it," and he wasn't actually as bad as like Caligula or something.
I always took the fiddled while Rome's burned as more of a allegory for the fact that he funded the arts and neglected the legion.
Yeah.
Hey,
That what I think was what part of his problem. He didn't know how to balance rulership.
Hey, we didn't have Hans Zimmer back then. We needed some kind of epic cinematic drama.
I mean, you could put Charles the First in that role of Nero if you wanted to, because that's a lot of what got his head chopped off. Was he was interested in the arts, he was interested in having things pretty. He didn't really get the politics of the time. He wasn't paying attention enough, and
Yeah,
there's
well, a
a
lot of rulers. King Stephen,
sure.
he thought he could buy loyalty.
Right.
And if you'd read Machiavelli hadn't written his The Prince yet, but if you'd read something comparable, he would
If
have.
he had a time machine and could have gone forward in time and read it.
Yes. I, I, I don't know about you guys, but I recommend that anybody who writes political fiction, no matter what era, read Machiavelli, The Prince. It's brilliant.
That was written while he was under house arrest too, I believe.
Yeah. Well, they didn't like the premise that they didn't like having the laws of rulership not being divinely given and it being your actions are going to define whether you're a good king or not some nebulous divine mandate.
Well, I mean, with that, and I don't know a lot of it, only a few things that I've read looking into it, only because of my first name. But I mean, some of the things that little things that I have read, you can go back to Richard I Lionheart with some of that.
Oh, Richard was a horrible king. Absolutely abysmal.
Well, when you hear about what he actually did, again, he had great PR, and how bad was John in comparison, really?
John administered the country while Richard was off fighting foreign wars.
Yeah.
You can't blame John for when Richard keeps sending notes home, send money. What's he going to do? He raises taxes.
No, you send a note back saying there is no more money, come home.
Then he comes home with an army and you're in a bad position again.
And it's a great crusade.
But you weren't in that position in the first place. So
there's these nasty people called inquisitors, and they might get upset at you, questioning God's battles, blah, 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 blah.
The war to control the trade routes to the Orient.
Which were still going on.
One of the ideas I have floating around for another book is something along the witch trials. So, yeah.
I've been working on something like that too. I had someone who was going to co-write it with me, but I think he kind of wandered off, so I was holding it. But he was going to write it from the Inquisitor's perspective, and I was writing it from the Inquisitor's, like the mayor of the town, who was his brother, and essentially have it be from my character be the political one who equivocates why these taxes are necessary and why the family needs to pay this and pay that for the execution. And it was going to some pretty dark places, but it was pretty interesting.
I actually used a it's in one of my modern works, Worlds Apart. Uh, but I used a transcript from the witch trials as the basis for a modern day witch burning, and tapped into that whole historical element as informing the modern day fanatics.
Mhm.
It's scary boo stuff.
Have you read the Book of Martyrs?
No, I haven't.
It's immense. Like it weighs a small ton, but it's like seriously like this thick. And it goes back to the time of Jesus, chronicling all of the martyrs that they could get their hands on, and all of their last words, what they all said, and it's quite the read. It's pretty phenomenal. I had a lot of relatives who were Mennonites, and so there were quite a few relatives in there who, not direct relatives, obviously, who went up and smoke, and they wouldn't stop singing. It's very much suited to my nature. They just wouldn't shut up. And so they actually invented a tongue clamp for them because people were like, well, they're so happy. They're so happy they're singing. There's got to be something to this. So yeah, they invented a tongue clamp that the Mennonites still make to this day as a reminder to people that if things are really dark, remember it's not that dark, and remember that, you can keep on keeping on, essentially, which I find quite interesting.
Yeah, man's inhumanity to man just doesn't matter which group you happen to be, somebody's done it to you.
Haha, witch group.
Yes. That's a black pointy hat.
Okay, so beyond what you normally write in, what upcoming things are you doing? I am currently writing the third book in my Journals of the Hunter series, but at the same time, when I get those blocks, and not blocks, just I need to take a break from her and walk away. When I take that walk, I have a cookbook that I'm doing. So it's like, yeah, worlds apart. So what are you guys doing? What do you guys do that's worlds apart?
Now we really need to get you Tim's Kitchen as a backdrop.
Yeah, I'm going to use that kitchen as a cover.
um, Myself personally, I'm across the board on that. I'm writing the espionage historical fiction, but I also I have a crime series that I'm working on. It's the Alex Diction shorts. It's a three book novella series, um, which I'm doing a whole ton of research on and learning a lot about crime and crime scenes and stuff like that. I actually enjoy writing it. I like it. Um, and I'm also assisting my wife as a ghostwriter in a sense. Um, Basically, we're kind of co-writing it together. We are writing the Immortal Hunter series, which is Vampire Hunters series. And no, my vampires don't glitter. Um,
God.
You may live.
Thank God.
and
That was so bad that I saw Count Chocula beating up Edward.
I'd like to see that.
oh,
I'd like
God.
to see anything beat up Edward.
But as far as that, I've got those. That's the three main things as of right now. Is Immortal Hunter series, the which will be under my wife's name, R.A. White, and then of course my espionage under myself, and the crime novels novellas under myself. And I do still have a western that I am working on. It's been on the back burner for a while. I want to at some point revisit that and get going on that and try to finish complete that book as well. And to letters from the grave, I have a plan of releasing a second one, and they, because it was very small, I want to release one or two more small ones, and then combine the three of them into a paperback book. Letters from the Grave, Deuces Wild.
Well, I have the Mistletoe Spear. I'll just bring the cover up, which is the sequel to Horn of the Kraken, coming up.
Uh-oh.
And that's in it's with the publisher now, so I'm waiting to get the editorial changes back, and it should be out this year. And I'm currently working on Revenant, which is the sequel to the next installment of the Chronicles of Ray McAndrews, my paranormal action adventure series. First book was Nuki Kubai. And I'm currently plugging away on the rough draft of it. And I've got a couple of other ideas that are just clamoring at the gate like wolves. So lots of stuff. If I live long enough, I might actually get it all done.
I'm working on the next of the Great Ladies and Game Changers. So I'm working on the sequels to those. This time piled into one. They're going to be great game changers instead of having it be men and women separate. I realized that was a bit of a mistake, actually. I'm working on the fourth book on the Dalton's Daughter series, which is where everyone thinks I'm Sasha. And that's actually a really cool one because it resets the whole series. Because it's a science fiction adventure, there is essentially, they come to a point where it's the end of the universe, and they come to battle, and they manage to win, and it resets everything. And Sasha ends up having a very different life, which is much happier and nicer for her. So I kind of wanted to give her that, especially since everyone thinks she's me. So be nice to her. And I'm working on a series called I think they settled on Shards of Me was what they decided. I rarely decide my own titles, but it's based off of a short story I wrote that's set in a maze, and it's kind of like a dystopian. Is it history? Is it future? Sort of thing. There's technology, but everyone goes around dressed in long dresses and stuff like that. There's swords and things, but there's also guns. And I've been asked to do that by name New Moon Press. And then I have a weird series of drabbles. I don't know if you guys know about drabbles.
I've heard that.
Yeah, it's things that have to be 100 words exactly.
Yeah.
And so I just sent some in just for fun, and I ended up getting, I think, 5 published with Black Hair Publishing, and those are supposed to come out soon. And I plan on kind of taking those and turn them into longer stories because
You see, you're an author. You make money off of your writing. Sustainable writing. I mean, sustainable money.
Well, I don't know that it's quite sustainable, but it is money. Yeah, I have some things that maybe I might get in for Chicken Soup for the Soul again. I was published there twice before, and that was pretty awesome because they even mention you on the Today Show or the Morning Show or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. And I also recently did an essay thing. It was on the Kellogg Briand Pact. Kellogg Pact.
Yeah. If there's any one TV show I would be mentioned on, it would probably be somewhere on Court TV.
But it was an essay writing about how it's actually illegal to invade any country. It was a law that was passed after World War II. And I sent this essay out to Vladimir Putin and to Donald Trump, to Justin Trudeau, Um, who else did I send it out to? I got letters back from Justin Trudeau and from the Canadian Corps of Engineers about it, about what we thought about invading and what we thought about the fact that Canada was putting landmines out there. Canada. So, kind of poke some things there. But yeah.
Well, defending and invading are two different things.
Well, it's the annexing. That's what we've decided to call it. Is we don't invade, we annex.
Okay. Whatever you call it, it's just not right.
It's illegal. But we've done this political thing. And so essentially my essay was saying that what we need to do is confess the fact that we're all liars and that we're all full of crap. And we need to go back and say, okay, we passed this law, but we did not enforce it. And we need to start over again. Because you can't pass laws that you can't enforce. That's a ridiculous, hypocritical thing to do. And the entire world is letting all of these evils continue based off of this pact that we made, promising we wouldn't invade when really we are. We just call it a different name. So yeah, I got an honorary mention for that, which was pretty cool because it was I
think life is pretty hypocritical.
It is.
Yeah, it is. You hold this country up because they are taking back land that they owned, 1,000 years ago. And yet, the people in this country who own the land to begin with, they can rot. Who cares?
Yeah, it's just whatever, and
pretty much every facet of life is hypocritical somewhere.
Yeah, well,
it is and it isn't.
After a few hundred years, you're in a situation, okay, if you sent me back where my ancestors came from, you'd have to get a bunch of matchboxes because I'd be mailed all over the earth. Some of them would be in Nova Scotia because I've got Micmac ancestry. In Scotland, Ireland, Wales, England, France. After a while, you just sort of have to throw your hands in the air and say, you belong where you are, don't sweat it.
Right.
From my perspective, I think you have to accept that this is your story. My way of thinking of it is my dad once came and apologized to me, essentially, for being a rotten father. And I said, I don't want your apology. I don't need it. I am who I am because of my life. I like me. And so I'm okay. You might want to go apologize to my mom, but I'm okay. And I think of that for my ancestors too. Like I had Irish ancestors who pretty much most of them got out of Ireland when St. Patrick came and said, we're not staying around for this. And I had other ancestors who were Mennonites in Russia by the Black Sea, and they grew silk. And then during the Communist Revolution, they got kicked out, and almost all of them got killed, except two brothers who hid under a silo. So I could choose to get really upset because, that's a lot of stuff that I should have that I don't. But instead, I think it's a story that made me who I am and made me sitting here today talking to you guys and liking who I am. So I think if you can come to terms with your story and like yourself, then the world isn't quite so hypocritical.
Yeah, I like what you said. I think that every single thing that happens builds you into the person you are.
Yeah.
Good and bad. I mean, I joke about my ex-wife, the evil bitch that she was, but she was there for a reason, and that was to teach me something. I don't know. But my second wife, who I love deeply, taught me how to control the anger that the first one brought out. So, one everything's a lesson. Everything's a lesson. Sometimes you get it then and there, and then sometimes it takes years before you get it.
Yeah.
But everything contributes to make you the person that you are. You talk about your dad. My mom and dad divorced. Well, I don't even think I was a year old. And my stepfather raised me. Great man, loved him. You know, um, but felt indifferent towards my real father because I didn't know him. You know, and then when my mother and my stepfather divorced, when he remarried, his wife wanted him to have nothing to do with me, which I thought was kind of a dick move that he went along with.
Mm-hmm. It was a
You know,
betrayal.
again, yeah, but again, it was a lesson to be learned. You know, and is that to never trust anybody? Some people take it that way. Other people are going to take it to where, okay, things happen. You have to deal with it. You
And you
know,
also have all the years of love before that, and those are valuable.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
those, like if you go back past that break and the betrayal, and you find that spot where you had that love still, like
yeah,
that's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
absolutely.
And despite the betrayal, that's there, and I mean
Hmm.
that's what I focus on for my own betrayals, because I've had massive betrayals
Yeah.
in my life, but I find those places where it just opens my heart, and that's what I focus on for those people. Like even the story my husband couldn't read about my brother, it left my heart more open to him.
And then 2 years ago, a woman got a hold of me. She said I was looking at your book, and she says, "Was your mom's name Alice?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And your grandmother was Virginia? And I'm like, "Yeah." And then she's like, "I'm your sister." And here it turns out my father, after they split, went and started his whole family, and now all of a sudden I have two sisters and four brothers. And it was like, oh, wow, I have a family, you know. And I could have been that person that only remembered that this man did nothing for me, or I could have been the person that said, "Hey, this man gave me life," or he was part of my giving me life, you know.
Yeah.
And by taking that route, now I can accept all these people, this family, and we all talk. And since I'm the oldest, I'm in charge, which is good.
One of the great things for characterization, I think everybody should look at Maslow's life stages, because things that happen to you at certain ages echo out through the rest of your life and how we respond to other matters. And when you're drawing from personal experience, it's really quite educational.
Mm,
Place
Mhm.
these events in your character's background that skew them in one direction, and people, they're more or less universal principles. People are going, yeah, that's why they're like that. That's why they can't trust. That's why they can't commit to a relationship, etc., because when you touch on what the root cause was, the character becomes richer.
hmm.
It really fills out.
Yeah, yeah. My fantasy book, Vespius, when she's 12 years old, the family is attacked, and she kills a man. Um, and this is what starts her on her downward spiral. And she's tortured again. That the fear thing. She's tortured by the voices in the storms. And you think, well, she's tortured because she killed somebody. But then as the book goes on, you come to find out, yeah, but there's a deeper reason. deeper reason was you could have wounded that man. No, I killed him because he threatened my family. My family.
Hmm.
He did not deserve to live. And that's what was causing the problems in her. Not that she killed him, but she was denying why she did it. And that's, that was my whole thing with her.
I have a similar thing with my character Sigurlina in Horn of the Kraken, and she's the nicest person in the world, and she's always trying to fix everything for everybody and make things better. And it basically comes back that she witnessed the Crusaders killing her parents when she was 12. And her response to this was, I've got to fix it. I've got to fix the world. And a lot of her character arc is coming to a point of, well, she's a Seth Kona, so she can hear the dead. And she's just getting more and more to a point of, yeah, boo-hoo, too bad for you. I've got my own problems.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a lot of her character development. And you could say it's almost counter to what our society tells you should be. But ultimately, for her own mental health and her own ability to be effective in the world, yeah, she's got to get there.
Yeah, exactly. My Vespius is the same thing. It's just one tragedy after another, and she's got to become a hard ass or she's not going to make it.
There was a wonderful scene in MASH where they were interviewing the Hawkeye character, and he said something.
Great show.
Oh, wonderful show. You can't care too much because then you bleed for everybody.
Mm.
And you just can't function. And it did. It was a wonderful thing.
See, I disagree. I really do. I think that it is possible to constantly bare your heart and to constantly be open. And I think that if you're willing to accept the fact that every single person you meet can stab you in the heart, that you can do this again and again. And I've forgiven people who it's actually driven mad that I forgave them. Like send them on drinking binges. I'm not kidding. Like when I was playing a game with them, they were, and to the point where they were like, "What are you doing to her?" And I was like, "What? I forgave her." And they were like, "Seriously? You actually did?" It's like, "Yeah, I seriously actually did." And to me, that's where I need to go. Is like, no matter how these things come, and like I've been through a lot. Like I've been run over by a car. I've been had terrible, terrible things happen in childhood that you would never believe, and I keep on forgiving, and it could just be stupidity, but to me, it's just the way I have to be because I know if I ever stop, I'll lose myself.
You got to do what works for you. For me personally, forgiveness is something that I'm giving to myself as much as the other person.
Mm-hmm.
It's I'm no longer going to waste energy on holding malice towards you.
No, it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
But in a character sense, it's interesting to show the process. It becomes part of the entertainment for the reader because maybe they're projecting into that and taking a lesson away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's the glory of fiction. You can educate through fiction without people getting their barriers up and blocking you.
Mm-hmm.
In my Tinker's World series, I do it on a very mechanical level. I do a lot of environmental education there, but it's all part of the dramatic line. I have a invention, a solar still for purifying water up in one of the what was it called? gadgets, sci-fi gadgets belong to her.
Hmm.
But it's a more visceral example of, yeah, you're educating that, yeah, the well water isn't going to stay clean if we keep doing what we're doing. Same works emotionally.
I think
And
passion is important.
yeah, and I have different levels of forgiveness, where I will just out now forgive you for something, or I'll go all the way to the other end where I will hate you for life and beyond. There are people now that I thought were real assholes in life, and they've died, and now they're assholes in death. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't change. You know,
He's a real asshole.
there are some people I'll sit and I'll look and I'll figure out why they were being an asshole, and I'll feel bad for them.
Yeah.
But I won't forgive them. They'll just be dead to me. I
Mm.
Yeah. Well, just because
don't
I
exist.
forgive you doesn't mean I'm going to help you move.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm not going to pick you up from the airport. No.
Yeah, and there's forgiveness for yourself, and then there's like being completely stupid, and being like, oh yeah, come and like cut my head off again. I loved it.
All right, guys, we're gonna have to end our historical fiction panel because we've got to get ready for novel ideas and shenanigans coming up very, very shortly. Um, but it's been a great panel. But before we go, I would like everybody to take a chance to share where we can find you on the internet, find your books, and all of that fun stuff. And we'll let ladies go first, of course, with Virginia. Where can we find you on the internet?
I'm really easy to Google. Virginia Carraway Stark. I think I'm the only one. I come up all over the place. Um, Same on Facebook. Um, I'm also at virginiastark.wordpress.com. I think that's right. And I'm on Twitter at tweets by VC.
I will have to get you there on tweets. Ed, where can we find you?
Um, okay. You can find all of my works on Amazon. Just on them. My name is Ed Ireland. I have 9 books out at the moment. Um, yeah, Ed Ireland is all of my social media. Um, it's either under that name or it's under Fabs fan because I'm a big Beatles fan. So it's FABSFAN. My Twitter handle is at FabsFan1. Um, yeah, that's about it. I'm here under my rock. I'm doing good.
Good. Steven?
Okay, the easiest one for me is my website, www.stephenpearl.com, www.stephenpearl.com. I'm also, rather like Virginia, you put Stephen B. Pearl into Google, and I own the first 2 pages.
That's excellent.
And fully decked out Amazon site as well, but I can never remember the URL for it.
Oh,
Me neither.
I don't think I can either. Just look for Richard White on there, and it's funny because there's like 8 authors on there.
Yeah. Could we post our thing to the Zoom group chat?
You can, and what I can do is I can add them to the YouTube video when we upload it.
Oh, okay.
That way I can, we'll get all that information from you guys, and when I upload the YouTube video, we will add all of that so that it's on there, where to find you guys, and all that good stuff. Myself, I am Richard White, or what you would look for is author Richard White, and you will find me, or you will find me under Beauregard Rivers or Shotgun Bow Rivers, where my current historical fiction title is lying under that name, my pen name. You can find me on Amazon. You can find me on Barnes and Noble. You can find me on pretty much any ebook platform there is for my other genre titles, as well as Letters from the Grave. And you can also find me on Discord, Twitch TV, twitch.tv/author Richard White. I'm on Twitter at rwhiteauthor. This has been OWS CyCon Historical Fiction Discussion Panel. It's been a great panel, guys. Thank you so much. We're going to close this down, and we're going to bring up Novel Ideas and Shenanigans, and I will hope that you guys would love to join us in there. I think I am this close to having a very special surprise for CyConners coming up in Novel Ideas and Shenanigans. I think I've got it nailed down. We're trying. So we will see you all over there at Novel Ideas and Shenanigans, and we will get this video posted to YouTube as soon as possible.
Cool.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Nice to meet you.
It was great meeting everybody, and yeah, thanks.